We are rolling.
All right, awesome. Let me just get this hair together. It likes to act up. Get that right there. Oh, I hope, did it flip a little crazy?
You got a little bit of a curly Q.
A little curly Q. Curly Q, I need you to get it together and get it out. All right. Ready?
Yeah.
Hey everyone, we're so excited to be back here in Atlanta, Ocean Bravo Studios. Today we have an amazing guest, Melody Bray, with us.
Hello.
And we're so excited to hear about her story and all that she's been doing out here in the metro Atlanta area. We're in for a treat. We just want to say thank you again for supporting us as we've been launching this podcast, ATL Rise, out here in metro Atlanta, lifting up the issues that matter most to our community members out here. Melody, thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. I know you're extremely busy, but you
aren't we all? I mean, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, all that.
Thanksgiving,
so,
yep. Yeah. And we hope that you guys enjoyed your Thanksgiving out there too. But did you enjoy your Thanksgiving?
It was good enough.
Yeah. I think I may have gained about 5 pounds.
Okay.
But I'm not done gaining.
Okay, it looks good on you.
We're gonna wait for Christmas, maybe even New Year's, and we'll get back to losing that.
Yeah.
New Year's resolution 2023.
You look good just how you are. So
thank you so much.
That's my vote.
So Melody, you have been doing great work out here in Atlanta.
Thank you.
For those that don't know you, I would love to formally read, just touch on parts of your bio, and then just jump into some of the work that you've been doing out here. Okay. Melody Gray, everybody, she earned her scholarship to attend Emory University School of Law. She served as a law clerk to the Honorable Courtney L. Johnson at the DeKalb County Superior Court. She also practiced law at the Fulton County Law Department, defending emergency service personnel from suit. Melody earned her real estate license and started Made ATL, which is a small business specializing in buying and selling real estate in Atlanta. She has a plethora of experience. She served on the board of Beloved Atlanta, which is one of the city's only residential treatment programs for women exiting sex trafficking. She also served on the board of Urban Recipe, which is an organization that provides food stability in the economically fragile. And also, which we are going to really jump into today, she co-founded the Georgia 55 Project, which is Atlanta's largest grassroots get out to vote organization. So really excited to have Melody. She also, fun fact, ran for state senate and district 38 this past election cycle, or the election cycle before this one, which was in 2020, correct?
No, that was what I ran in the primary.
In the primary
this year, so May 24th of 2022 was
we're getting
my
her hot off the
election.
press. Hot off the press. So we're excited to have you, Melody. All your experience, you've been doing so much great work out here in Atlanta. I wonder if you can just talk a little bit about what led you into politics. I know that you were previously, you're by trade and by education a lawyer.
Yeah.
What sort of led you into the trajectory of politics?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we all knew that kid in school who grew up wanting to be president. That was not me. I ventured into politics because there was a gap that I was seeing, particularly in 2020. First of all, take yourself back in the time machine to the cluster that what 2020 was, and looking around and seeing that there are so many gaps in leadership, and starting to feel a pull in that direction.
Yeah.
And when I started or co-founded Georgia 55 Project, we originally thought it would be kind of difficult to venture into the political space.
Okay.
Seeing that people really are compelled to help, they just don't necessarily know how to get there, and they're willing to come along with you if you cast a vision.
Right.
That to me let me know, like, oh, you could do this if you wanted to do it. And for my particular Senate seat, you had an absentee senator who hadn't been there in 2 years.
Wow.
And you had a bunch of people who needed representation,
Right.
And no one stepping up. So that was kind of the reason I did it. It was that there was a gap, there was opportunity, and there's a real need in Atlanta for true leadership.
That's really powerful. And I love that you were first serving and co-founded this organization, the Georgia 55 Project. So for those of you of us that's listening that's never heard of it, can you talk a little bit about what that project entails?
Yeah.
And what really inspired you to be a co-founder of it?
Sure. So it was as grassroots gets. The beginning of it was I and my three co-founders were standing in our own voting lines.
Mm.
And first of all, they were voting lines. This is June of 2020.
Wow.
And it was hot. It was so hot that June. And I was looking at these older women and men sitting or standing at the front, just patiently waiting to be able to vote. And so I turned to a friend of mine and I was like, why don't we go like tomorrow and just like go to Costco or whatever and bring back some food, water for these folks. And so we did that. And in a very millennial type way, some other folks on social were like, some of these other people are doing it, y'all should link up. And so we did. So within 7 days in June, we were able to raise close to $10,000 to be able to serve every line in Atlanta in majority minority districts. And when the general election was coming up, we were like, we're gonna ramp this up. So we went from that to having over 400 volunteers. We served every single majority minority district in Atlanta, and not just food and water. We expanded to whatever you need to vote. So beyond just how do you get your absentee ballot and how do you sign up, but what is a senator?
Right.
Why do I care about what they're doing? What's at that point we had a public service commissioner on there. Who's that? How does that affect me? Oh, that affects my Comcast bill. Okay, I'm listening. Right. You know
now
what I mean?
You got
like,
my attention.
Yes, like breaking things down for people so that they realize that if you're gonna be forced to stand in line on your lunch break, let me tell you why this is worth you standing in line. And it was a wonderful experience to be able to just work with people who wanted to be there for their neighbors in that way.
I love that. It's really interesting. You made a point about educating the community members about the reason why we vote. And I think there is a lot of times such a disconnection in our communities of color. Part of it may be a lack of understanding of why it's important to vote. Part of that is we may not understand what representation means, right? We don't understand what, for example, the commissioner does, or what a city council member, what a Senate member does, or what they can do, right? Their powers. And so there is sometimes that disconnect in terms of understanding why it's important to get out and vote. What was it like when you were essentially educating the community? What was it like for you, that experience?
So one of the things the examples I like to give, so running against this incumbent who has not showed up. So when I go to the door to knock and introduce myself to people, I let them know, did you know that the person who's been representing you for decades, she didn't actually show up to work for the past 2 years.
Wow.
So that's the initial response, right? Wow. Then the follow-up is, well, can she do that? There's a disconnect that our politicians are our employees. And so when I say to them, like, oh, no, I mean, that's why I'm here, because we are empowered to be able to get actual representation, and I'm asking you to fire her. Wow. That level of putting some kind of real life scenarios, like if you didn't show up for your work for several days, do you think that you would keep your job? Well, no. Okay, well, that's how this works in this. I think that we have a gap, not just like there's a lot of effort now in kind of the nuts and bolts of voting, of here's how you get your ballot, here's how you fill it out, that kind of thing. I think there's a major gap in actual substantive information. Civics 101. Asking people, I would tell them I'm a state senator and they would tell me about their trash issues. And I'm like, I understand that is an issue, right? That's not what we do, but I can tell you about your city councilman who's or woman who's over this, and here's their contact information, how to get them. People just don't know, because they have real lives and have to put food on the table and get to work and, keep a roof over their head. So I get it, but that just means that those of us who do know need to work a little harder of integrating into people's daily lives to make it accessible for them.
Yeah, I think that's so important, like that substantive information that you talked about. A lot of times we have a lot of drives of get out to vote. This is how you vote. But the why behind that, the purpose is really, there's a lot of disconnection in that. We've seen in the last elections, we were just talking about this prior to coming on, how there was what would appear to be a drop in the number of people that voted for a specific candidate. And we talked about the reasons why. And, you know, it was some interesting things that we mentioned. Like sometimes people are making a decision. Do I get out to the polls and vote? How does this benefit me and my family?
Correct.
How does
what
this,
have you done for me lately?
What exactly?
You
What have
know?
you done for me? Why should I get out there?
Yeah.
What is it that's going to motivate me to come out of my home and get on the lines and go to that poll site and vote? And so I think, you know, it's very interesting that, you know, we talked about, especially over the last few years, how people have lost a lot of hope and have lost trust and leaders and you know, and that
and
may
rightfully so, right?
Yeah,
Like
agreed.
it's an article came out, I believe it was this week, might have been last week, but the AJC, our primary newspaper here in Atlanta, posted an article about the wage gap being the top in the nation again. And you know, the average Black or brown household, $28,000 a year. Average white household, 84.
Wow.
Like we're not talking
That's
small
yeah.
incremental numbers. We're talking real numbers. And it's
Right.
one of the things that I'm not sure if I've mentioned to you, but I've done work in housing policy work. And one of the measures they look at is they call it being house burden. So for a person to feel stable in their housing, they should be spending less than 30% of their income on their housing and their transportation. You're making $28,000 a year. Meaning in Atlanta, let's round up. You've got to spend less than $9,000 a year on your housing and transportation. Where's that? Where's that happening? You know what I mean? And so I can see you're knocking on the door of someone. That's a family of four. That's not like one person making $30K.
Right.
You're knocking on that door saying, "Hey, I'm here to tell you to get out and vote because we're going to make a change." She's like, I'm still making $28,000 a year. Come back when you have something real to talk about.
Right. Yeah.
I get that. I understand why you would tune out and focus on making sure that you can still pay your rent. Until those people who are in power actually push forward in interesting, courageous, inspirational policies that make real change, it's hard for me to continue coming to you and tell you that you need to go out and vote.
Yeah, that's so real. I'm thinking about a number of things. One of them is and door knocking in my short experience out here. I remember knocking on a door of a elderly Black male, and he maybe was in his 70s or mid 70s, and you know, he was like, "I'm not voting." He's like, "I've been here 60, I believe he's at 60 something years." So I did the math. I said, "Wait a minute, you've been here since the Civil Rights Movement," and he said, "I am not voting." And I thought about it, and I said, what would make, you know, someone in that age range that seen so much come to a place where they're like, "Just get away from my door, I'm not voting." I said, it is mistrust. It is, you've lost hope in leadership when you're consistently promised that things are going to change, but they never change. At some point, you're going to stop believing.
And the only time that y'all come around is when you're asking for my vote.
Right.
I don't see you for the next 2 to 4 years.
Right.
I mean, I can't disagree with them.
Yeah. What do we do about that? Like, what do we do when we, I mean, you talked about the inspirational policies and, you know, of course that's like the trajectory, but like in the more immediate than now, what do we do as a community to really empower our communities of color that feel so, you know, just robbed consistently? They're going out and they're consistently giving their vote, they're giving their, but then they're not getting really anything in exchange, at least what they've expected or what they were promised. At this point, when people are just burnt out, they're tired of being tired, they're fatigued, they've gone through so much loss and so many other things. Now at this point, they've lost hope. What do we do to help restore that?
I mean, I think it's a reciprocal relationship that we have with our political leaders.
Right.
We as citizens, I believe we are not really giving them the ammunition they need to stand up and do interesting and courageous things. When people step out and do something that's a little bit different,
right,
I would prefer you step out and do something different that fails,
right,
than do absolutely nothing just to keep the status quo. And If
Wow.
we want there to be change and innovation, you've got to be okay with a little bit of failure,
Oh yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So to me, there has to be a constant discussion. So for instance, over on southwest side of town,
Mm-hmm.
there's an ongoing discussion about whether there should be light rail put in
Mm-hmm.
or what they call bus rapid transit.
Mm-hmm.
Emory area is getting light rail,
Mm-hmm.
and they're suggesting that Southwest Atlanta should get BRT, is the short for bus rapid transit.
Mm-hmm.
Huge community meeting, and the general sentiment was, well, if it's good enough for Emory, it should be good enough for us.
Right. Mm-hmm.
To his credit, Andre Dickens showed up. He was there for the full meeting. The meeting was probably 3 hours long. Full meeting, engaging the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, listen, guys, we have a transit issue around here right now.
Right.
Light rail is going to take 7 to 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
BRT takes 2 to 3.
Mm.
Okay, the quality of the transit is the same,
Right.
but it's cheaper and faster for you. And then he literally asked people to raise their hand. Who here wants to do BRT? Who here wants to do light rail?
Right.
Engaging in actual discussion, because I believe that if he comes down and says, I'm going to go ahead and support BRT, even though the majority of you said light rail, just the fact that you got to hear your leader explain his reasoning,
Right.
physically see that he took a poll
Right.
and took that into mind. He sat there with you for 3 hours discussing it.
Yeah.
And then he went and made a decision.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you don't agree with me, I'm like, okay, that just seems fair.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We don't really have that
Mm-hmm.
on an ongoing basis from, county, state, federal leaders. We've got people making decisions that are far away from their constituents.
Mm-hmm.
We've got folks just making decisions because they're running numbers as opposed to engaging with their constituents.
Right.
I think that we could really have we can have more inspiration among citizens if they felt like they were being heard.
Right.
Even if we don't agree, I just want you to hear me.
Mm-hmm. That's really powerful, and I think a lot of times people feel ignored, overlooked, and I think these issues are universal in communities of color. I'm thinking, I'm of course originally from New York, but these are some of the same issues we see, not just out here in Atlanta, but in New York City. People feeling like they're overlooked, they're not heard. Things are happening in their communities that they don't have the ability to vote on, to learn about. I mean, I've seen so much from developers coming into communities of color and just putting up all kind of things, and even going into the community board is voting against it, but developers are still doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So and it does lend to not feeling heard, not feeling like you're being listened to.
Right.
So it sounds like a lot of the work needs to happen with our leaders.
Doesn't it always?
Our leaders, right. But I'm also thinking about even the grassroots. So like in the case of your project, the Georgia 55 project, it was very grassroots, and so you were essentially giving the power back to people.
Yes.
And so I think even that grassroots strategy is important too, empowering our community members through right civic engagement, because I think there is the civic engagement that we're saying, oh, we've checked the boxes, we've sent them out information on where to find their polling sites, but real true civic engagement is empowering people.
Correct.
And giving the power back to them. So I think grassroots strategies are also really important.
Oh,
and
100%.
Yeah, I'm
100%.
always wondering, how do we as a community start to look at grassroots differently today so that it's effective?
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I've noticed, at least in grassroots orgs, is there's not necessarily a desire to fill a gap. There's a lot of overlap, a lot of repetition. I would love to see in Atlanta, and there are I do know a few orgs that are kind of doing more of a roundtable look at things. We all get together. We've all got an end goal. Let's say in this particular scenario, it's making sure voters are empowered with information in order to make decisions for themselves. Right. Here's one thing that I was thinking of doing. Anyone else here thinking of doing that too? And if I'm like, oh yeah, I actually already started it. Be like, okay, do we split geography or constituents? Right. Do I go do something different? Which does mean that you have to put down your ego. You've got to put down like well, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm good at. This is where my network is.
Right.
Because at the beginning, we just said, this is our goal together. So, like, how do we get to this together and work in tandem with one another?
Yeah.
Because there are limited resources.
Yeah.
You know?
It's interesting. I noticed something, and I'm new out here, of course.
Yeah.
Once again, I'll keep saying that. But what I noticed is there is that sense of not working in tandem or working together, and there tends to be a lot of working in silos.
Yes.
I'm wondering.
Yes.
It's like,
yes.
how do we? Humility, of course, is one. Is acknowledging that we don't have all the answers, we don't know everything, and that we're actually stronger when we come together and when we bring our resources and our collective knowledge and abilities and skills together to really help our communities. I mean, that's what we've seen, many decades ago in the civil rights movement, right? They didn't have much, but they were able to bring together their resources.
Yes.
They were able to bring together their abilities and their skills to really move forward their communities to the point where we've seen change on a federal level, right? And that's really the power of the collective. But when we're in our own little spaces, doing everything in silos, competing for God knows what I don't even know what it is, titles and position of power. Meanwhile, kids are killing each other and a community out there is dying. I'm just wondering, how do we just get past all of the fluff and the politics, although today is about politics? How do we redefine and reimagine politics?
That is a broad question. So you are right that Atlanta, in my opinion, Atlanta suffers from silo syndrome. Particularly so for City of Atlanta, you have Fulton County, DeKalb County, then you have City of Atlanta on top of that, then you have the state of Georgia, then you've got federal on top, and these people are not talking. Layer into that, you've got your superintendents for your schools, and even within the city, you've got Fulton County schools and Atlanta Public Schools, DeKalb County schools, and those people aren't talking. So one of the things that I really desired, and I never put it like on the website or talking to constituents about it, but when I was talking to people in kind of in politics, the not sexy, boring side was, I would love to be a liaison, like to create a roundtable of all of these governmental units, with the desire that, like, let's say you as a group say we're gonna have these 2 or 3 goals. Everybody in your wheelhouse, you work toward these 2 or 3 goals.
Right.
I don't think it would take much for, as long as you got a win, that people would start to come alongside. All the folks who were kind of off on their own, doing their own thing, realizing like, oh, that big goal that people have been talking about forever, that finally got achieved because y'all worked together on that thing. Now all of a sudden, like, oh yeah, I'm interested in maybe, being part of that. That's what a caucus is on the federal level. Like, we don't have those types of things on more of a hyper local level, but there's a reason caucuses exist. To have, like, we're all moving in one direction.
Yeah, that's powerful. I'm thinking about I'm gonna shout out quickly Harvard University.
Do they need shout outs?
Right.
I think they should.
Like, they'll probably be listening to this later, so I'll shout them out. Doing a program, their leadership program there, called Implementing Public Policy, and I learned some really interesting things through this program. And one of the things that I learned is oftentimes we are working, as I mentioned earlier, so separately, working in our own little corners. We don't talk to each other. We're all working on the same issue.
Yes, and
it's like, how?
It's also so inefficient. It's so inefficient. Like, at the very least, it's so inefficient. But at the worst, it's, are we actually serving the people that we purport to serve? Right.
Yeah. Exactly. And one of the issues that my agency has been working on is the youth mental health crisis. Particularly in New York City. We're loving to bring this to Atlanta as well, but really looking at the ways in which the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated the mental health issues of children. Not that it has caused, but it has exacerbated, because we know that in communities of color, there is lack of access to mental health clinics and mental health resources. And so we've been trying to really lift up this issue in New York. recently we brought together city agencies and nonprofits and universities to talk about the youth mental health crisis. And what was really interesting, not that the mayor didn't show up, but a whole nother story, but that we, when we brought these people together, it was the first time that they had actually spoken to each other.
Yeah.
About an issue that we're all working on. And it's like, how do we solve complex problems? How do we solve the issues in our community if we're not willing to come to the table together and to work in collaboration with each other? It's almost impossible.
I mean, there is a level of the system itself. Like we have created and endorsed a system that we've decided this is the way that we're going to do this thing. This democracy or democratic republic system.
Right.
But because of the way that we have it set up, it is every man for himself, dog eat dog.
Wow.
And in the original, like, you know, so legal background, there are different ways that you can interpret the law. Originalists get a lot of flack for a lot of reasons because the world has changed in many ways. But one of the points of originalism is the idea that, like, none of this was meant for you to do this forever. This was not meant to be a career.
Right.
You were not supposed to be paying your family's, you know, bills with this. This was public service in order to make a country run.
Right.
And so the idea that if we can get back to that mindset, this is public service in order to make our communities run.
Yes.
Then it's not about me. It's not about, you know, putting my name on this flagship policy or whatever it is.
Right.
It's about outcomes.
Oh yeah.
And if we can become a little more outcome focused, as opposed to making sure I get mine.
Right.
But you know, we're supposed to be inspirational, all that, but
let's be real.
you know, I don't know if we're so far gone that that is a pipe dream. That's, you know, naivete. Get over that. You're going to have to figure out another way. Is there a way that you can actively recruit individuals who are committed to that? And you also need to have citizens and constituents that are going to give those people a high five by voting for them.
Oh yeah.
To keep them around and endorse good behavior. You know, politicians are like puppies. You gotta give them treats, and they'll pretty much do whatever it is that you want them to do. But if they don't get any treats, they're not going to do it.
We call that political buy-in. Right. So
that's the fancy way.
Yeah, political buy-in. Yeah, that's the and it's also it's because you need your stakeholders, you need your politicians. They do serve their purpose, right, in our communities as leaders. But I think understanding that purpose, first of all, knowing who they are. Like everyone right now needs to go on the internet. If you don't know who your local politicians are, and look up who's your local city council member, Senate member, commissioner, all of that. You need to know who your leaders are. Representation is important. So know who your leaders are. If you haven't booked a meeting with them, try to reach out to them. That's important too, right? But also understanding what their role is. What is their purpose? What are they supposed to be doing? Because then only can you really hold your leaders accountable when you know what they're required to do. So I think that's important. Getting that political buy-in as well is also essential. I think these are things that, you know, I in communities of color haven't seen us really exercise as much. Understanding like we do have power, we do hold power, and a lot of times we feel powerless. We feel like we really can't make change or affect change or have an impact. Fiction. It's such a fiction. Yeah. It's such a fiction. And along the way, I'm not sure when it happened, but along the way, I feel like we've really started to lose our sense of understanding our place of power.
Yeah, I mean, I would venture to say that there are powers that be that are ensuring that people believe that they do not have power to
Tell me more about that.
I mean, I don't think it's happenstance that Black and brown people of color feel like they are not able to accomplish things. When you're looking at the demographic trajectory of where the United States is going, we are very close to becoming a majority minority country. That scares the bejesus because she told me I'm not allowed to cuss. That scares.
You're doing good. You're doing good.
That scares a lot of people who do not look like you and I.
Right. Right.
Who also want to remain in power.
Mm.
And so if they are able to convince you,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't matter who you vote for,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't matter what you do,
Right.
it doesn't matter, how many times you request a meeting with your city council person, your life is still going to be hard.
Mm.
And if you look at a lot of the rhetoric, it is everything's burning.
Mm. Wow.
It's a Chicken Little, like the sky is falling. One of the reasons that I believe the Obama campaign was so successful was that it was the first in a while that brought forth a hopeful narrative,
Right.
which in our presidential on either side, we are not pushing forward a hopeful narrative.
Yeah.
We are hoping that fear keeps people motivated.
That's what we're seeing, too, especially COVID. So much fear, just fear being funneled through the media and like mass media, where people were just afraid of. And I feel like we use fear as a technique and a tactic.
Absolutely.
And fear is
but
not.
You don't think about the repercussions of what that does in the long run.
Anxiety is one of them. Anxiety has risen severely, especially amongst young people. Suicide ideation. We're seeing so much go on. It's sad. What happened with the Walmart shooting, LGBTQ club, what happened out there, and we're just seeing just a lot of people just coming to a place of really driven to a place of insanity. And I believe that a lot of it is attributed to the pandemic and the driving of fear. We've seen people just afraid of losing their lives, rightfully so, because what was going on. But that tactic has had some repercussions that we're now seeing, and we're opening our eyes and we're like, what's going on?
Yeah.
What's happening in our communities? But if we were paying attention, we would have caught this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Years ago.
Absolutely. And one of the thing we were talking before this about, this most recent general election and turnout. And that lack of motivation to stand in line.
Right.
The Trump election and that large turnout was a reactionary election, right? But it didn't just start in 2016. He didn't just come out of nowhere.
Right.
There is a long arc that got us there. So my concern is that we go over this hump. Everybody kind of says, okay, we're good, we're cool, everything's fine.
Right.
And the arc begins again. And we're get to a point where there is another reactionary election.
Right.
If we come at things from more of a hopeful, aspirational way,
Yes.
we don't have to get there.
Right.
We don't have to get to the point of being reactionary. We can actually be proactive in what we're doing. It's up to our leaders to strike that narrative.
Yeah. We need to also raise up a new generation of leaders. I think you had mentioned, sometimes you really do, you get to a point where you're like, is this all going to change? Is it ever going to change, right? Because it becomes to a place where you just see the world in a very pessimistic, viewpoint. But I think one of the things that I'm hopeful about is our generation that's rising. That's our alpha generation. That is our generation. Oh my goodness, I'm losing the name of the generation.
Oh, I can't even keep track
anymore. It is our
anymore.
Alpha, and then right over Alpha, what is it? Oh my goodness, I don't remember.
Don't ask me.
But I'm gonna get back to it. And so Generation Z. That's bad.
those people.
We have a whole Generation Z program. My staff are gonna get me for that. So Generation Z and Alpha Generation. I tell you, I love them so much.
What what age range is Alpha in?
So Alpha is I would say around 12 years old and under.
Okay.
Actually I would say maybe more around 15 and under. And now our Gen Z are now parents.
Yeah, that's
How about
weird.
that?
That's weird.
How about if we're millennials, we're kind of old now.
Oh, you call me a millennial? Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Look like a millennial,
I'll
so
take it.
we'll go with that. But Alpha and our Generation Z, they are. I'm really hopeful because they're a different breed. They are no nonsense, ready to jump in the street and just riot. Not that I'm advocating rioting, but they're willing to stand for something. And the fact that we have a generation that's coming up under, they're seeing all of this, and they're the ones that are emerging, and they're ready to now say, we're not dealing with this. I don't know what y'all heard. I don't know what y'all generations did, but we are not willing to deal with this. And I think just having that, holding on that passion is really what's going to help propel us forward.
Can I push back on that a little
Yeah.
That's how they all are, right? These boomers that we're dealing with now,
right?
You're talking about. Look at the 60s, 70s, parts of the 80s. Things were wild, and the second that you've got mortgages and children and IRAs and all of this stuff. I mean, if you look at the data, people start out far more left-leaning liberal,
right,
for the most part,
right,
and then as responsibility and life happens, they become more centrist or center or right or far right. And so I hope that there's some sort of catalyst that stops that constant trend of, because really what those numbers mean is when you're younger, you think more about the collective, and as you get older, you think more about the insular.
Right. Something happens.
Yes.
For that to, and I think a part of that is our institutions, our schools, right? The way in which we're training our kids, which is why there are a lot of outdated methodologies and systems that will lend to children starting to sort of make that transition and that turn from the collective to just being about their own selves and just survival. If we can find a way to reimagine our education system, I say deconstruct it all and just reimagine it, because it's old, it's outdated, and it doesn't lend to a world that we now live in. And so I think it starts with our institutions, of course, our homes, but finding a way to keep that fire burning and really training our children, our next generation, our young people, because they are our future. They're the ones that are going to carry this legacy on. So I think if we find ways to create these, I guess, a curriculum in our institutions and just an entire shift in terms of the way that we're training and raising up our kids, we'll see them merging even as young as in their 20s. Younger 20s, early 20s, taking position. Why not? Why can't our young people become city council members? We're doing it. I mean, in New York City, we're seeing young people as early, I think, as 22 city council members.
This last cycle, Florida has your first Gen Z House of Representatives.
Here we go.
Absolutely.
So there is a way. I think we got to keep hope alive.
I will also say that I think that one of the reasons people move from the collective to the insular is that societally, we force you to.
Oh, yeah.
Like, nobody's going to take care of you.
Right.
What you're being told is you got to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
And so why should we be surprised that people become more selfish when you're being told on a consistent basis that nobody cares about you but you?
Right.
So until we figure out how to actually instill kind of an ethos in our world that I have a duty to you as another person, as my neighbor.
Social responsibility.
I don't need to know you. You know, I have a duty to you because of the inherent dignity of you as a human being. Until we get to that point, I don't know if that cycle is going to break itself.
Yeah, I think it's important. We call it social responsibility and social work, but it is really how do we understand how we're connected to those around us, to our community. And I feel like it's really interesting. I have these conversations with, I'm probably going to quote the generation wrong again, but I think it's Generation Y. So the generation born in like the 60s, I believe it's a Generation Y.
Born in the 60s. Keep going.
What I noticed is I felt like back then, especially in communities of color, we were a lot more united. There was an understanding of the power of the collective, of social responsibility, but somehow, and there are many reasons why, right? Why we've as a people, because even though society was moving towards insular or just silos, I feel like our communities remained alive and strong because we were together. And I definitely believe we had to be. But I feel like we have to be again.
Mhm.
We need to.
Yeah.
We're in an era where we need to be back in
Yeah.
that place of the collective. But I definitely believe that there is a way to get back. We've been there before.
Mhm.
We full circle have to get back to a place where our communities of color are not just looking at our neighbors and like they ain't got nothing to do with me or what's that got to do with my family, but really being able to say this is my neighbor or my brother or my sister, and being able to really understand their connection.
Amen to that.
Well, we've talked about a lot, and I think we covered a lot of great issues. Is there anything in particular that you believe that you want to highlight about the Metro Atlanta area that you've been seeing in terms of the needs out here in this community? And it's very broad, but anything that you've been seeing that you want to highlight that we haven't touched on?
Oof. I mean, I love Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
I think Atlanta, the phrase Atlanta influences everything. I was just over in Portugal, and there was Run the Jewels stuff up, and like
I love it.
we are everywhere.
Yes.
But we also have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the main things, so I grew up in the church, and pastors would preach on if you look at your budget, it'll tell you where your heart is, show me where your money goes, and that'll tell me, about what you value.
Yeah.
If you are in the Atlanta area listening to this podcast, please track how these people are spending our money.
Right.
And hold them accountable.
Yeah.
That's your city council people. That's your school boards. And that's your state and house reps, state senators. How are they spending their money, and what does that say about our priorities? Does it say that we care about providing affordable housing to people?
Right.
Does it say that we care about feeding our children?
Right.
And making sure that they know where the next meal is coming from, so that when they go to the school to get education, they can actually focus.
Right.
I feel like money is everything.
Yeah. I believe that too. And let me tell you this, there is no scarcity of money. Because when it is time to put a project, all of a sudden, where did this $5 billion come from?
There you go.
There is not, and we've learned that money is never the issue.
No.
It is, like you said, the priorities. Where are we placing the priorities? And something as simple as basic needs. Basic needs need to be met. It is, if we're not if our basic needs for shelter, for food, security is not met, we're not thinking about civic engagement. Let's be real. We're thinking about feeding our kids, feeding ourselves, and keeping a roof over our head. But we have to be able to come out of survival into a place where we're thriving.
Yeah. That's why I encourage people: follow the money, and that will tell you everything you need to know.
Yeah. Are there any resources or websites out there that people can look up
so
to?
it's law that budgets are public information.
Right.
Particularly before they're passed, they usually have to go up, be published, and have a public comment period where you can go down. Now, for instance, our city council meets in the middle of the day. Like, people don't have time to take time off to go talk to you about your budget. But you can email them. You can ping them on Facebook or Instagram or whatever their site is. You can still do those things from the comfort of your home after work or what have you, in order to let them know, like, hey, we've been asking for X for Y number of years.
Right.
And yet again, the budget hasn't included that. Why not? As opposed to just complaining about it.
Right.
Asking for actual, like, why not and when can we expect it?
I love that. That is the essence of civic engagement. And lastly, we have a runoff elections coming up.
We do.
I think in about a week. Less than a week.
It's
about a week from today. Yep. Any advice that you would give to people in terms of getting out to vote?
I'm not allowed to say who to vote for, right?
Nope.
Okay. I would say there is plenty of information out there about this particular election for our federal senators. Read it and come to a decision that is in your own best interest.
Right.
To actually get out and vote. Vote early. Do not vote on the last day of early voting. It's too crowded.
If you can help it, please.
If you can help it. And bring a book, bring a snack, The lines have been there.
Yeah.
You know, but it's worth doing because there are consequences to elections, and this is one of those elections.
Yeah. That is really, really real and powerful. So, those out there that are watching, listening to this podcast, we want to encourage you to get out to vote. Civic engagement is important. And so, we want you to understand the power of your vote, the power of your engagement. Get out there. It is important. A lot is riding out on these elections. Melody, Bray, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
For being with us. Hope to have you again next time.
Love it. It's been a pleasure.
We'll see when your schedule clears up again. Bring you in. And lastly, what's next for you before we end?
Girl, vacation.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah, coming off of the election, I put myself on decision hiatus until next year. So
I love it.
Stay tuned.
I love it. We'll be staying tuned and following your work. And how can people get in touch with you or reach out to you to follow?
So my website's madeatl.net, and you can also find me on Instagram at mbizzle.realty.
I love it.
I'm always in the DMs talking to folks, so reach out.
I love it. Thank you so much, Melody, for joining.
Thank you.
And thank you all for listening, for tuning in, and for watching. We appreciate your support. Please stay tuned for our next podcast and continue to let us know your thoughts, your feedback. We definitely want to hear from you. This is ATL Rise Podcast, where we're lifting up the issues of the Atlanta community. Thank you all for watching, and stay tuned. All right. Awesome. Thank you.